the reality is those feel good metrics, maybe you don't want to use them. Because unless you're actually doing something with that data, it's data for the sake of data. And we should focus more on the outcomes. Let's get you to the outcome that you need, but maybe we don't use the same tracking methods. Because again, the big takeaway here is finally somebody is starting to come down on the wild, wild west of this internet. Hey there, welcome to the Dr. Marketing Tips Show. I am Jennifer.
And I'm Corey.
And today we're going to talk about a very important deadline that happened on May 11th. And May 11th, 2026 to be specific. The world of digital marketing changed a little bit, and that's because the government is starting to pay a lot more attention to compliance issues related to your website and your entire digital ecosystem.
Yeah, so the long short of it is that the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services finalized a rule under this specific section of Rehabilitation Act, which basically just means that it is now harder to be ADA compliant, and you as a practice are responsible, obviously, for your website, but also for some of the experiences that patients and potential patients have through some of your third-party vendors. So the May 11th deadline that Jen just referenced is for practices with 15 or more employees, where essentially you have to reach this higher standard of compliance. And if you're a practice with fewer than 15 employees, you can actually have a little sigh of relief because your deadline is May 10th, 2027.
All right, well that's all. Like, it's nice to have a sigh of relief, but the reality is I don't think we're blowing smoke on this. There have been significant dollars applied to ADA lawsuits across the board when it comes to websites. Corey, why don't you give us just a sense of how much we're talking about here?
Yeah, so a couple of numbers for you. Since 2023, there's been 4,000, oh, I'm sorry, over 4,000 ADA lawsuits filed. So that's up 14% year over year. So it's growing. The average cost to defend and settle is somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000 plus whatever your attorney fees are. And 77% of lawsuits are actually targeting small businesses, meaning that even if you are one of those practices that's under 15 employees, no group is really too small.
Yeah, and I think that we actually have these conversations in our office, our virtual office, all the darn time. So we have another agency that we own that we've acquired over the last couple of years that still dabbles in some non-healthcare stuff, different team, whatnot. But we were having like a collective conversation because this agency historically has built websites to ADA compliance. And I was trying to get an understanding of if we've built to ADA compliance, then how come this client, who isn't really a full client, they're a web hosting client, how come they are being sued and they're in the middle of litigation related to ADA compliance? And the feedback from our web developers really painted a clear picture, and I think it will resonate with our listeners because you think that you've hired somebody and they've built your site to ADA compliance and you have nothing to worry about. But the fact is the minute they've built it and moved on, the rules are changing. Is that right, Corey?
Yeah, so something that was built, 4 or 5 years ago would now be, and if it was compliant then, it's now not compliant because this new standard is so it has to meet level double A standard, it's called, which is a higher and more specific technical bar than it was previously. So even if you, yeah, like I said, a couple years ago, you would have been fine. Now, not so much. And then on top of that, I think the thing to pay attention to is that this whole idea of compliance, it actually extends beyond the main website even. So that includes things like your patient portals, online scheduling, telehealth, downloadable documents, PDFs. Practices, because of this change, are legally responsible for the accessibility of the third party tools that they use. So your billing portal, for example, even though you've just contracted a vendor to do that. So that creates this really big like market need. And I don't know, I can't speak to what the vendors are doing and paying attention to, but I know for us, we've been really focused on making sure that either we build to this level of compliance or there's a tool in place that allows us to help meet that level. And what I mean by tool is, and there's a bunch of these things out there, but you can go and install something on your site that allows users to, for example, change the font size of your website. So as you were building it, you may have been really meticulous and you really wanted these certain colors on the backgrounds and this particular font and this certain size. So, but there's tools out there where if I'm visually impaired, I can click on it. You've probably seen them on some websites you've been to. It looks like a little blue circle and there's some type of symbol in it. You click that, it opens up a menu, and then I can change contrast, colors, font size, all kinds of stuff. And that's one of the ways that a lot of groups can sort of band-aid this and use that as a solution to say, well, we are in compliance, so we have our design, but if you have special needs, you can use this menu or you can tab over on a keyboard and get to the schedule button or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and I think that, like to your point, like you got to build your site with compliance in mind, which is sometimes tough because we've got to go back to the doctor or back to the practice administrator and say, no, we can't use that color with that color text. I know it looks pretty, but the reality
Mhm.
is it's difficult for people to read. My ex-husband was colorblind, and it was very hard for him to read certain colors on top of other colors. A couple of years ago we talked about ADA compliance all the time because this rise in litigation, an entire cottage industry that had jumped on to suing people for ADA compliance. But the fact is it elevated that level of conversation to do something that we should have been paying attention to in the first place, and it took those lawsuits to get us there. Well, now the government, I don't know if it's HHS or somebody else or CMS, but the government's now paying attention and they're doing this across the board. We've mentioned it before. I would highly encourage that if you didn't watch or listen to the episodes related to cookies and things going on in that cookie universe and privacy first analytics, that you go back and do it. But the fact is you're dealing with the ADA compliance issue now because the government has really said, we're going to put some real rules in place, and everyone's either going to get in compliance or they're going to get fined, and the fines are significant. And they're doing the exact same thing as it relates to cookies and kind of your overall digital landscape. So I would say that if your practice has not looked at these things in the last 6 months, you need to several times a year just make sure that whoever is doing this, whether it's your IT company that is managing your website and your analytics and your tracking, whether you're working with a marketing firm, whoever it is, you need to have in place some assurances that several times a year that they're taking a look at this. And I think the final line of defense outside of just doing the right thing and making sure you're up on it is kind of what you just said, Corey. It's, add an extra layer of security, but with a plugin or something to that effect that allows somebody with an impairment to make adjustments to your website so that they can have the most they can have an almost the same experience as anybody else out there.
Yeah, exactly. And just to clarify there, it's the Office for Civil Rights, so OCR is the one,
Got it.
the
OCR.
government
Well,
side. Yeah, is part of
OCR is
HHS.
also the office that issued $10 million in fines last year related to the cookie issues. So definitely, if you didn't listen to or watch those episodes, Corey, I think we should link them in the show notes so that those individuals kind of can get a full picture. But these are the things that you should be having a conversation with your marketing team, whether it's a vendor, internal, or your IT team, whoever is managing your website for you.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to say that yes, there's this potential fine from OCR, but on top of that, there's also the litigation aspect of it, right? Where there's they're called cottage industry is the term that gets thrown around a little bit. Surf by lawsuits is another one. Where basically like there's groups that are establishing themselves as firms they're either using an automated scanner or they're engaging with clients that want to use this tool, essentially to just go out and find non-compliant sites and then send them a demand letter and then settle out of court, right? It's one of those things where then the
Everything's
law firm,
settling.
right, the law firm doesn't get paid unless you get paid. So it's an easy way to make a quick buck. And as an aside, the other day I was looking for a dentist, and that was covered under my insurance. And I went to like 4 or 5 different websites, and every one of these I was like, oh boy, they are in trouble. So
Yep.
it's one of those, and it's the same deal. They're 15 people or less for most of them. Smaller area part of the country, but they have no idea, and so they are ripe for the picking here, unfortunately. So I think that there's a couple of things that you can do here, some actionable steps. Number one is do an audit. And you don't have to do anything too intense. This is something that should take like 5 minutes or less. Go to your website, see if you have that little blue icon down in one of the corners. Yay or nay, write it down. Um, Write some emails to some of your vendors, click on some of the links there. If you click on a patient portal, do they have it? If you click on a billing portal, do they have it? And just kind of take stock of where you are with those things, because again, the liability comes back to the practice for that. So once you kind of got that little list, step two, I would say, is fix the low hanging fruit stuff. There's some things that you can do relatively easily. That can be some contrast changes. That could be installing one of those tools we mentioned with the little blue circle. And the reason that I'm not mentioning any of those, by the way, is just Google it. There's seriously like a half dozen of them. Just pick whichever one you want. Some of them have free trials or free tiers. Some of them don't. Some of them come with litigation support. Some of them don't. So I'll leave that to you to figure out. But there's a couple things from a website you can adjust pretty quickly. Like I mentioned, the colors, big buttons, those kinds of things. And then if all else fails, install one of those plugins and use that as the first step. Then I would say step three is probably after you've done that audit and you know where your vendors stand, call them, email them, and ask for their accessibility statement and what their plan is, what their roadmap is, because maybe they have something and you're just not aware of it. But it's good to get all that stuff kind of documented and down. Um, and then also make sure that you're taking a look at your privacy policies, because that's something that a lot of people just forget about. So, add an accessibility policy to your footer or to your privacy policy that just sort of explains what your policy is on the policy.
I think that's great information. I think that, look, on May 11th, 2026, the compliance world for your website changed. And you need to get in front of this, because 99% of the practices that watch or listen to our show are above 15 employees. And
Mhm.
so now is the time to send this episode to your vendors and say, hey, are you on top of this? Let's go ahead and install something on the website just to make sure we have an added layer of security. Whoever built your website, this is a good opportunity to go back and tell them, look, I want you to, a couple times a year, I want you to really look at the site and make sure that we are at the highest level that we can be. And the little plugin that you're going to use is going to be your added layer of security. And if you take anything from this episode, realize that the government is starting to really clamp down on the compliance issues and, you know, everything related to your digital footprint. It's not just your ADA compliance on your website. It's your cookie policy, it's your privacy policies, it's, making sure you have a BAA with Google or Meta, which, by the way, folks, they won't sign a BAA. So you need privacy first analytics installed on your website. And if you are having, if your marketing firm or your tech team has put analytics on your site so that you as a doctor have some kind of vanity metric that makes you feel good, the reality is those feel good metrics, maybe you don't want to use them, because unless you're actually doing something with that data, it's data for the sake of data. And we should focus more on the outcomes. Let's get you to the outcome that you need, but maybe we don't use the same tracking methods, because again, the big takeaway here is finally somebody is starting to come down on the wild, wild west of this internet. And, unfortunately for healthcare providers, a lot of times you're the ones that are getting pulled into this early compliance stuff. And so because every state kind of has a different rule, the federal government's starting to come down. It's the water's very murky. So the best thing you can do, pay attention to it, do the right thing up front before the government has to come down and starts issuing fines.
And the only thing I want to add to that is I think a more immediate threat than the government finding your website and issuing a fine is the litigation side of it,
Agreed.
because that's growing. We have both heard multiple stories of this happening, and I think that is one of the things where it's going to get worse before it gets better, because people are going to find out that they can make a quick buck by doing this. And the best thing that you can do is put yourself in a position to mitigate as much of that risk as you can. And so, like I said, step one is probably that audit. And if you don't even have the time for that, but you found the time to listen to this, send this episode to somebody and have them look into it. And I think that's probably your best bet.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct in this. The litigation factor is real, and I can say that because probably 3 times a month, at least at this point, we're getting requests for the backup materials to prove that the sites are ADA compliant, or we're having a conversation about somebody being pulled into litigation, and we're starting to have to provide the forensic evidence from the back end of websites. So this is a real issue that we all need to be paying attention to. I'll say this too, Corey. I was at the MGMA conference out in California speaking, and looking at the agenda, also looking at the agenda for other MGMAs that I go to. Nobody's talking about this. Nobody's paying, like, I don't want to say people aren't paying attention, but it's not making its way to the mainstream yet that these rules are changing. And the person in charge of compliance for your company is maybe not as focused on the website and the technical issues related to your website and your digital footprint. So make sure you're finding a partner that pays attention to these things.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. And it just comes back to what you said. Make sure that when you start these things, you're doing the right thing up front, and then you're continuing to check, recheck, and you've just got sort of the right team and process in place to make sure that you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's.
Got to cross those T's and dot those I's. So with that, I'm Jennifer.
I'm Corey.
We'll see you next time on the Dr. Marketing Tips Show. Thanks a bunch.
Bye, guys.
If you want more like this, hit like and subscribe so you'll always be alerted to new episodes when they come out. And if you want information about us, visit us over at insightmg.com. That's insightmg.com. We'll see you on the next episode.